I can tell you this, just going back to Parkinson's for a little bit, so to give you some answers here, has the president been treated for Parkinson's? No. Is he being treated for Parkinson's? No, he's not. Is he taking medication for Parkinson's? No. So those are the things that I can give you full-blown answers on, but I'm not going to confirm a specialist, any specialist that comes to the White House out of privacy.
So here's the latest. President Biden vowing to stay in the race despite mounting concerns over his fitness for a second term. White House visitor logs showing 8 visits in the past year by a neurologist specializing in Parkinson's disease. Joining us now from Washington is Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian. Jordan, have you ever seen that room as hostile as it was in this administration?
It was one of a handful of moments where things got very heated. And these moments have tended to happen when the press secretary is not forthcoming about something that was plainly obvious to everyone in the room. And this was, as you just mentioned, a neurologist who specializes in Parkinson's disease visiting the White House complex 8 times. Now, it took the White House until yesterday evening to say why that Dr. Kevin Kennard was at the White House, that he was conducting clinical consultations, treating some other military members. But her stonewalling in the middle of the day just made the story worse for the White House. It certainly got the hackles up of the reporters in the room.
Jordan, I woke up to that letter from the president's physician in my inbox and thought, why did it take them hours to get ahead of this? The story's been circulating for a few days. Why is it taking them so long to get ahead of all of these issues, including Biden yesterday coming out swinging? Why did it take him a week after the debate?
Yeah, it's puzzling. These are all good questions, Anne-Marie, and there's no real clear answers to them. This is a press operation throughout Biden's presidency that has struggled to get the message out, that has struggled to get ahead of stories, as you just mentioned, to drive the narrative on what they want to talk about versus getting put on their back foot. And that was another example that happened yesterday. The problem for them is the stakes are incredibly high, and any misstep at this moment, post debate for Biden is going to get examined, 10 times more intensely. And so they haven't adjusted their approach. They only started this full court press to try to save Biden's presidency more than a week after that debate. And that's why they're digging out of such a deep hole that they're in.
Jordan, John brought this up earlier, and it was that moment a few days ago with Justin Sink and Jean-Pierre about the, quote, big boy press conference. What can we expect from the president on Thursday?
Well, Thursday at 5:30 or so, he's going to appear before the press. And look, I mean, we're going to have to see whether this qualifies as a so-called big boy press conference, as my colleague Justin put it. Is he going to stand up there for an hour, take questions, all comers, or is this going to be a tightly controlled affair like we've seen throughout this White House? A lot of Democrats, it's emblematic because a lot of Democrats have wanted to see Biden put himself in more unscripted settings, speak more off the cuff. And we've seen him do a little bit of that. He's done the interview with George Stephanopoulos. He called into Morning Joe yesterday morning on MSNBC. But he hasn't really let it loose like other presidents I've covered who've just been unafraid to take all questions, all comers. So we'll have to see if Biden does it on Thursday. And if he doesn't, there could be more backlash that he could face from his fellow Democrats.
And Jordan, there's already been quite a bit of backlash. We've been talking about the Democratic elected officials that have come out saying that Joe Biden should step down. Why are the progressives, one of the wings, that are now actually coming out with aggressive support for the sitting president?
Well, one thing we've seen, Lisa, is groups that make up Biden's space. So like labor unions, voters of color, have been some of the most outspoken supporters of Joe Biden since this debate crisis occurred. And the more vocal segments of the party that have been calling him to step aside are the donors, some of the party consultants, more of the so-called elites that Joe Biden called out in his interview yesterday morning. And so I think you're seeing some of those progressive members respond to their constituents, respond to the people who support them, and voicing their support in that way. And so what you're seeing Joe Biden do is actually kind of divide his party between black voters, union voters, and the so-called elites. Now, that might help him save his presidency in the short term, but in the long term, you're heading into a November election with a divided party against Donald Trump, who has the Republican Party in an iron grip. That's going to probably hurt his chances of winning even further.
Jordan, just a thought exercise. Do you think if the former president could move the RNC, the convention, maybe a couple of weeks, do you think he'd push it back?
That's a great point, Jonathan. He's been content to sit back and just let the storm clouds gather around Biden. But look, this is Donald Trump. I mean, he's playing a disciplined politician now, but this is a guy who has constantly gotten in his own way throughout his time in politics. And I'm sure, he is itching to get out there and say things. And look, if you look at his true social account, the social media accounts, he was on Sean Hannity last night. He's been itching to get out there. He likes the spotlight on him, whether it's good or bad for him. So, maybe his consultants want the debate to happen at a later date, but I'm sure Donald Trump wants to get up on that stage.